Hey everybody, how you all doing today? It's Jordan here from Switchwatch. Now I'm back again with another shoot 'em up review in Strikers 1945-2. Now I played the original and I absolutely loved it, so of course I was very excited to review the sequel too, this time for Switchwatch. Is it worth your hard-earned cash? Well, let's find out. Strikers 1945-2 was originally released to arcades in 1997 and eventually saw releases on the original PlayStation and Sega Saturn. This psycho shooter is now out on the Nintendo Switch thanks to Zero Dip, who have already ported over the original Strikers, Gun Barrack, Gunbird and more recently Zero Gunner 2, which I just reviewed. I also played the original when it came out and loved it, but then again, I'm crazy about shooters. But do I think this one is up to standard? Like almost all hardcore arcade shooters, there is basically no story in Strikers 1945-2. I know it's supposed to be a direct sequel story-wise, but you'd never know unless you read the leaflet that came with the arcade cabinet. So in that regard, I'm just going to leave it there. It's a furious all-action shoot 'em up. There's very little need for a story, and for that I'm actually rather happy. Who needs a story when you're just going to spend 15 minutes blasting through waves of enemies? The audio is pretty solid. It comes across as a little muffled in this port, but otherwise it's a great rocking soundtrack that really gets you pumped up to destroy hordes of enemy craft. The grungy electric guitar crunching away, and every track is really awesome. Sure, it's actually quite difficult to differentiate between tracks as they are a little samey, but it's still very fitting and great to listen to nonetheless. It's the kind of soundtrack that I would be happy to listen to outside of playing the game. Visually, the game for me is pretty nice looking. It has the classic sprites which I always enjoy. It doesn't have too much visual flair compared to other shooters, but that was the case for the original too. Colours are a little dulled, which is a shame, but it suits the World War II theme this way. When it was released back in 1997 when 3D was becoming the thing, this game probably looked a bit dated at the time, but it's aged far better than many of its peers in the visual departments. The performance is perfect, no slowdown whatsoever, in both docked and handheld, which is what you'd expect, but you never know. Many older arcade games suffered from horrific slowdown back in the day, but that's not the case with Strikers 2. It's a silky smooth experience throughout. The gameplay follows a very similar mold to the original if you've played that. You choose one of 6 varied crafts to blast through 8 sweat-inducing vertical levels of carnage. There are 7 difficulty options to choose from, and don't let it fool you into thinking that monkey is actually for monkeys. Even on that mode, later levels can become ridiculously hard. Strikers 1945-2 is definitely one of the hardest shooters that I've ever played. It's quite a change of pace from Zero Gunner 2, which I kind of breezed through after a few goes. I think even if I played Strikers 2 100 times, I would still find the ending stages tough. As for your weaponry, you have 3 options. You have your normal shot, which is set to auto-fire on the Switch's A button. It starts off weak but can be upgraded by collecting power-ups dropped by enemies, usually of red colorings. You can only upgrade a couple of times before it's maxed out, but it definitely makes a huge difference. The second attack that you have is your charge shot. This is normally performed by holding the shot button, but on the Switch it's set to Y. Holding it down will do a quick charge and unleash a special attack. Finally, you have the panic bomb. Pressing B or X will do your super attack, which will decimate your enemies and shield you in equal measure. You only have a couple of these, but like the power-ups, more can be collected in the stages. They are by far the most powerful thing in the game and can devastate even the toughest of bosses, well worth saving for a rainy day. It should be noted that each of these 3 attacks are completely unique to each of the 6 different crafts. There's a lot of variety in these ships, and that is always something that is the key to my heart when it comes to a quick arcade shooter. Trying out all 6 is cool, but I'm sure you'll eventually find your favorite 1 or 2 that work for you. Personally, I loved the flying pancake thing. No, I'm not joking, that's actually what it's called. Each of the stages have varied landscapes, from frozen waters to towns and so on. They don't really have their own gimmick or anything. They always culminate in a tough boss battle, which are always impressive with how they have multiple forms, transforming mid-fight. Overall, the stages are pretty standard and do lack a little touch of personality. They're far more grounded than the original 2. There's no going into space this time, which I found quite amusing in the original. As I said, it plays almost identically to the original, which is good for the fact that the original was an excellent shooter in itself, but also disappointing in the fact that they didn't take it to the next level. If you've played Strikers 1945, you've basically played Strikers 1945 2. If you loved and desperately crave more Strikers, then this is great, but if you feel like you've had your fill with the series, then there's nothing much that's going to persuade you to get this sequel. It's much of the same. Of course, I need to also, when possible, sing the glory of the vertical mode. Hidden away in the pause menu is the ability to rotate the screen, taking away the borders and giving you the full length of the Switcher screen. Well, almost. It's wonderful in all honesty, and the fact that this exists just makes me want to squeeze my Switch with joy. Of course, it's not the largest screen, so I personally would love a Switch XL, should Nintendo decide to do an upgraded model in a year or 2. One thing I used to criticize Zero Div, the publishers, for is the lack of button mapping in their ports of these classic Psycho shooters. Well, it seems they have listened, because button mapping is now possible in Strikers 1945 too. Saying that, I didn't feel the need to use it in this particular game, but I'm sure some of you out there will. Other available options are the changing of how many starting lives you have, how many continues you're allowed before game over, and how many points you need before you get an extra life. While I don't like pumping these up when possible, because of the difficulty here, I really needed to in order to get a grasp of the game quicker. It will take a while before I will feel comfortable enough to put them back down on default. As for value, like I will always say for an arcade shooter, it just depends how much you intend to play it. If you're going to play it once, then don't bother. Like its predecessor, one 15-minute playthrough will be a waste of your £6.99 or $7.99. As enjoyable as it may be. The whole point of games like these, though, is to master them. Lose as few lives as possible, increase your high score, and challenge the higher difficulties. This is a game you'll want to play over and over again if you're a shooter fiend. If you're not, then it'll be a total waste of your hard-earned cash. Overall, if you're crazy about shoot-'em-ups, and I know that plenty of you out there are, then I know you've probably already picked up this game by this point. You don't need me to tell you otherwise. If you're on the fence, then it may be more difficult to persuade you, since Strikers 2, while excellent, does nothing to differentiate itself from the original game. In that regard, it's a disappointment they couldn't take it to the next level. Plus, unless you're a hardcore shooter fan, you may struggle to get your money's worth out of it if you're not wanting to replay the game over and over and learn it by heart, which is really what it's all about. As a shooting fan though, it's still an easy recommendation, and I would give it an 8 out of 10. As always guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Switch Watch. I hope you've enjoyed this review. It's always a pleasure to review shooters since they've become one of my favourite genres recently. If you're a regular Switch watcher, then you know what to do. Smash that like button and leave a comment. Do you guys plan on picking up Strikers 1945 too, or is this just not your cup of tea? If you're new, then why not consider subscribing for more awesome Switch content? And finally, check out our website, switchwatch.co.uk, where you'll find written reviews, articles, and features. I've been Jordan from Switch Watch, and I will see you next time.